Okay, assalamu alaikum everybody. How's everyone doing? Good? Okay. I'm going to try that again. How are you doing? Good. Okay, I hope that you are having a great time at I.LEAD, inshallah. I'm very happy to be back on the stage to talk to you about addressing issues primarily for parents, but I do see some young people in the crowd. So later when we have a chance to ask questions, I'm inviting everybody to ask questions, including young people. And if they hear me and Imam Ibrahim Hindy making suggestions about how parents can do better and they have their own, I welcome young people to give us their take as well, because it shouldn't only be us kind of thinking about it. We also need to hear from young people. So please take that as an open invitation to people to think about what advice they would want to give their parents as well, inshallah. No more grounding, for example. Okay, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So I'm very excited that Imam Ibrahim Hindy is here in Ottawa. He is quite active in the Toronto area. And I'm actually going to stay standing, if I may, just because I find these awkward. Imam Ibrahim, people are sitting in this room, they've decided to come and sit down here because the topic is of interest to them. They want to think about how they are parenting their children, and it's certainly a very challenging time that we're living in. When I think back to when you and I were teenagers or younger children, we had all sorts of challenges, many similar, but there are new challenges right now that our kids are experiencing. And for us, even though some of us did grow up here, it's really hard for us to navigate this space and to figure out how best can we support our kids. So maybe if we can sort of start off this discussion right now by getting you to share your own reflections as a parent, trying to figure out, what is the best way to support our children on a path that makes them happy, but also makes them fulfill their actual goal in this world, which is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulih al-kareem wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. I think you touched on a lot of really important points that I think are really challenging to parents today. We talk about the generation gap between parents and children, and I myself, I'm born in Canada, I'm raised in Canada, my children are born here, they're raised here. I'm not that old, to tell you the truth, and I still find an incredible difficulty with my own children, whom I share a culture with. We're born and raised in the same city even, and there's still that difficulty in that generational gap. The reality is that these kids are growing up in a world that's completely different than the world I grew up in. The way that cell phones are so available, that my child is 2 years old and can work an iPad, and I didn't even have iPads growing up. That's a huge difference that should tell you how drastically different the world that they're growing up in is different than the world I grew up in, even if we're in the same city, speak the same languages, and grew up in the exact same place. And let alone if you're an immigrant to this country, and your children are being raised in a completely different culture, with a completely different language, with completely different references, it tells you how drastic that gap can be. And Ali radiallahu anh, the companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his family member, his cousin, he said, لا تربوا أولادكم كما ربوكم آباءكم. Do not raise your children like your parents raised you. And that's a really powerful sentiment, because most of us take our code of action from the way that our parents treated us. In fact, the way that you treat your spouse, the way a husband treats his wife and a wife treats her husband, is often dictated, like the DNA of how you treat each other is based on how your parents treated each other. That's a reality, and there's research that shows this, right? Like you have this DNA of how to act that was based on how your parents acted. And the way you treat your children is informed heavily by how your parents treated you and raised you. And that's important because it's not always going to work when you grow up in a generation completely different than their generation. And so Imam Ali says, don't raise your children the way that your parents raised you. فَإِنَّهُمْ خُلِقُوا لِزَمَانٍ غَيْرَ زَمَانِكُمْ. Because they were created for a generation and for a time that is completely different than the time that you have been raised in. And so that's really important, the things that your parents did, how they treated you. You know, your parents maybe never gave you any allowance, and then you look at your kids today and say, I'm not going to give them any allowance either. That might not work when they're in a classroom where everybody is getting, you know, allowances from their parents. And instead you're making your child feel deprived. Right? Like that's just one circumstance that shows you the way you treat your child has to change based on the situation, the context, the culture. All of that has made changes in how we have to treat our children. But the number one point, and I hope that if there's nothing else you take from this discussion today, is that there's going to be a lot of outside influences that affect your home, and a lot of people are afraid of their children growing up in the climate that we have today. You have to establish a principle with your children where the relationship between you and them is primarily based on mercy. The Prophet ﷺ, every time he entered his home, he would kiss the forehead of his daughter, Fatima, every single time he entered his house. Every time he came home. Imagine a father, every time he comes home from work, he's kissing the forehead of his children. That's a really powerful message, because when the Prophet does that, then even if he's disciplining his child, even if there's a strain on their relationship, that child will never forget the mercy the Prophet established that relationship by. And so no matter how difficult the circumstances are, they're tied together by building that foundation of their relationship on that love and affection and mercy. And that has to be the principle, the driving principle that never changes in terms of how we establish our relationship with our children from when they're very young to when they get older.
So, absolutely, that sounds right. Obviously, we know that our faith is one of love and mercy. But as I often say, and I said on an earlier panel, these are still abstract topics to discuss. So let's try to unpack it a little bit. So for instance, let's talk to the parents who are struggling with their tweens or teens. As you know, being a teenager is full of challenges. And now we are in an Instagram, Snapchat, all of it. Facebook is for the grandparents. But, we know that the kids are getting their information primarily from other sources than their own parents, from the mosque, if they go to mosque at all. So how do you try to navigate that with mercy, for instance, if you see that they are always on their cell phones, that they are not giving enough time, as you see it, to reflecting on their religion? Can you ask a 16-year-old to sit and reflect on Allah? What is realistic here? How can you advise parents to be realistic when you know that the kids are being pulled in all sorts of directions?
Absolutely. So I think one of the first issues that have to be addressed is that before they get to those teen ages, you really have to take that time seriously. I know that's not an answer for those who already have those teens, but I'm trying to appeal to those whose kids are younger, because that's a typical situation that happens, where when they're younger, we're just letting them go free, we're not establishing a personal relationship with them that's deeper, we're not having discussions often about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're teaching them the religion in a very formalistic, like a recipe, where it's like your religion is, these are the rules of salah, these are the rules of how to make wudu, these are the rules of how to make ghusl, these are the rules of prayer and fasting and zakah, and that's your religion. That's not how you teach religion, right? You have to teach religion first of who is Allah, what's your relationship with Allah, why should you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then after that everything flows, right? but we don't do that. And so we have to talk about, before they get to those teenage years, how do we establish that relationship with them early and have that relationship of trust and love early? That what activities are you doing with them to ensure that you're engaging them often? Are you ensuring that their friends are good from when they're younger, so that when they're older and they're in those teenage years, that's already been established? So you have to do the groundwork early rather than just kind of letting it all go free, and then all of a sudden at their teenage years, you're trying to ring the alarm bells. We got to take responsibility early. Now, if they're already there, what do you do? If they're already zoning you out, they're on their cell phones, they're on Instagram all the time, they're talking to their friends, what do you do? Well, there's going to be growing pains to establish that relationship at that point. But you need to find a way to enforce it. And that mercy in that circumstance might be a form of discipline. It might be, hey, I'm establishing a rule that today, on this day, all of our family gets together, we're eating dinner together, we're playing board games together, and we're not using our cell phone. And everybody's going to be upset, and your husband might be upset about it too, and the kids might be upset about it, but that's a way to force them to eventually open up and eventually have trust and eventually build that relationship between each other. And they might not like it at first, but down the road, it'll actually benefit them a lot. Another thing is, you want your teenager to talk about Allah and to reflect upon the relationship with Allah. Frankly, they don't want to do it with you, and I get that. But look for opportunities or try to create a circumstance where a younger person who might be in university, who might have a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and have some knowledge, might be able to sit down with a bunch of teenage girls, or a brother from university might be sit down with a bunch of teenage boys and have an open, frank conversation with them that they might be more receptive to. And it might take a few weeks for them to open up, but that might be a really powerful way to create that conversation, to start it off. So look for other agents who might be able to start that process for you.
So far, all incredible advice, and I know many of us have heard this advice before, and it sometimes takes a lot of effort to implement it. I want to shift a teeny bit, though, to talk about where there is a two-parent household, or if it's a single-parent household, what is the role of the parent themselves to model behavior for their children?
This is an incredibly important point. Let me state it like this. Your children listen to you with their eyes way more than they listen to you with their ears. Your children will listen to you with their eyes far more than they listen to you with their ears. One of the great early scholars in Islam, they noticed that every once in a while he used to pray super long. Like he would pray his normal prayer, but every once in a while he has this super long prayer. And they went to him, they said, why is it all of a sudden you have these prayers that are really long? He said, I know that my son was here. Like, I knew my son was here in the masjid. And I wanted to make sure that my prayer was the best when I was in front of him. And that's because he understood that my child is watching me, he's seeing what I do. And he's following me, he's going to listen to me far more by when he witnesses me acting a certain way than when he hears me preaching to him. And we do this often as parents. We tell our kids, and sometimes we say, don't follow me in this. I'm doing something wrong, don't follow me in this. But you can't do that. Your kids are watching you, and your kids respect you way more than you think. And they follow your lead way more than you think. And so you need to be very cognizant of the example that you're presenting your children, how you're speaking in front of them, how you're dealing with your friends in front of them, what moral leadership you're providing your own family. And all of us as parents are flawed. We're not, we're not angels. But try to hide that from your children. Absolutely. Try to hide the side of you that is not the best in front of them, because you have to present your best self in front of them in order for them to recognize your moral leadership and try to follow you as best as possible.
So this might be a bit of a sensitive question, but those who know me know that I don't shirk from asking sensitive questions. We know that divorce rates are going up in our communities. And we know often that when parents are exploring the issue of divorce, the often concern is on the children and the impact on the children. if you may, from your experience working with families in Toronto, can you provide a little bit of understanding about the fact that, on the one hand, certainly we know that divorce is looked as a very last resort in our faith, that it is not something that is completely haram, like, for instance, in other faiths, there are faith traditions that completely have said divorce is not allowed. We do have the option. But on the other hand, we know that the preservation of the family is in and of itself a very valuable goal. So if you could talk about the balance between, if two parents are struggling with their relationship and the house has become less of a safe space for their children, what role do they have to either fix what's broken or make that decision to separate, not just for them, but also for the sake of the children? How do you help families navigate this extremely sensitive, potentially irreparable situation?
So, in my experience, I see the entire spectrum, where I see people who are going through really terrible marriages, where there's abuse, and it can be physical abuse, it can be verbal abuse, psychological abuse from one partner to the other. And in those circumstances, and you've gone through the entire process and people have tried to reconcile and there's no attempt, the attempts of reconciliation haven't worked out, that situation is worse for the children than for there to be a marriage. And then you get the opposite circumstances where people are just not taking their marriage seriously, where there's no abuse, they're just not taking it seriously, putting in the time, putting in the effort to try to work out the situation between them. And so Islam wants from us to take our marriage seriously, to recognize that this is an oath in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before it's an oath in front of two people. To take it seriously, to do our best to try to make the problems that are between the husband and wife, to work them out for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first and then our children afterwards. But we can't also be in the circumstance where we're creating a toxic environment for children. So if there's abuse, if there's serious abuse and people are really harming each other, and by extension harming their children, absolutely Islam is allowed for you to go through that door to go into divorce. But even in that circumstance, there are obligations. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, stay with them in ma'ruf, stay with them in what is good, and leave them in what is good. So as you're departing from each other, if the two spouses are departing from each other, they need to depart on good terms, where they recognize the rights of their children even as they're departing. And they're taking care of their obligations for each other in front of their children. That they're respectful of each other, even as they're breaking up, even as the marriage is dissolving, they're respectful of each other for the sake of their children. One of the worst things that happens is there's a divorce and the husband is telling the children terrible things about the mother, and the mother is telling the children terrible things about the father. This is entirely toxic for the children and for both of them, and now the children are going to grow up with no respect for their parents. And I'll tell you one story of a husband who got a divorce from his wife. And he was in Canada, the family was in Canada, the wife ended up moving back to India. And they had children. And the wife would send the children and pay for their tickets for them to come to Canada to see their father. And when the mother got sick, years down the road, the mother got sick, she got cancer in India. The husband left, went to India, stayed with the children in India, took care of them while she was sick in the hospital. And eventually, she passed away. But that was such a great example for me because I've rarely seen that, where two people got divorced and they had so much respect for each other, and they had so much respect for each other in front of their children, and they raised their children, even though they were divorced, to have respect for each parent, where they sacrificed so that the other parent had access to their children. I'd never seen that before. And that's an example that should be emulated and an example that the Quran expects of us. So yes, divorce is not the greatest thing in the world, but when it happens, there's still a good way to do it. And we have to encourage our communities not to have the stigma where we blame people, but rather in the situation where the divorce is happening, support people still having an honorable divorce that the Quran does speak about.
Thank you. Imam Ibrahim. As I'm asking questions, we do have microphones. I shall focus on this one right next to me. So if there are people who are thinking about questions that they would like to ask Imam Ibrahim, please do stand there, and then we'll note that. We have about another 20 minutes or so to explore these issues. So Imam Ibrahim, yeah, we're definitely going to get deeper and deeper here. Because I do think people come to these events hoping that they're going to hear something new or maybe explore something from a different angle, so I'm hoping we can do that. I want to talk a little bit about mental health in our families. And I want to talk about, you talked about the stigma around, for instance, divorce, and certainly there is a stigma around mental health, and how families are able to seek out psychological services, psychiatry services, social work, social counselors. What has your experience been in that realm, and what advice do you have to parents or young people who feel they may need some external help?
So this is a really important question. Obviously, mental health is such a vast topic to discuss. One thing that I will tell parents is recognize, and tell youth especially, recognize that the social media that a lot of us are consuming is having an effect on our mental health. There's two things happening right now. Like, mental health illnesses are spiking. Why are they spiking? On one point is because, for one measure, is because in the past people were afraid to come forward and to say that I have a mental health illness. Now people are feeling more comfortable, which is good. But another issue is that our addiction to social media, our exposing ourselves to the lives of other people and constantly prying into their lives, is contributing to some of the depression that people are having. When you're going on Instagram all the time and you're seeing this person's having such a great life and that person's having a great life and that person's having a great life, you're actively making yourself more sad. And so that's having a psychological influence on people. Obviously, there's a variety of ways that people can have mental illnesses, but that's one thing that I wanted to call out for people to be aware of. Now, another thing that's important is, how do you speak about mental illness in your home? Especially as parents, how do you talk about it? Sometimes the language that we use when we talk about people who have mental illnesses is very toxic, is very evil. We talk about people who have mental illnesses like they're crazy, they're insane, they're a terrible person. When you engage that with your children, then your children, if they have a mental illness when they grow up, they feel resistant to getting help that they need. So the language we use and the way that we approach that topic is really important. And I can tell you an example I know of a family who are just like that. They're coming to me now, they're saying, my son is addicted to video games, he's constantly depressed, he's even a little bit suicidal, and I'm trying to get him to go see a therapist. And he's refusing. And I tried to talk to him, and he has all these notions that if I go see a therapist, then something's wrong with me, that I'm a crazy person, and I don't want to admit that to myself, and I don't want to go do that and have that stigma. Where did he get that idea from? He got it from his parents to begin with, and his parents told me that themselves, right? So, really be careful the way you talk about mental illness from when your kids are really young, because that's going to have an influence. Maybe later you're hoping your child gets therapy, right? You might be in that situation later on. We want to make it easy for them. And if someone has a mental illness and they're able to get therapy early on, it might make their life a lot easier than if they wait and their problems, start to overburden each other and start to pile up. And then by the time that they're seeking help, they've got a ton more problems later on down the road than they would have had earlier on. So we want to make it as easy as possible for people to get help. And really think about the language that we use and how we talk about it and how we talk about people with mental illness, so that our children feel comfortable that if they need help, they're able to seek it.
Is it okay to assume or to suggest that someone is weak in their Iman if they are depressed?
Yeah, and that's another great point, and it's a common problem, is that people talk about, well, you're weak in Iman if you have depression. You're weak in your Iman if you have X, Y, and Z. And that's not true, right? Depression is a clinical illness. If someone broke their arm, would you tell them you have weak Iman because you broke your arm? And you have weak Iman if you got a cast onto your arm to heal your bone? That's weak Iman. You should have just made dua. If you just made dua, your arm was going to heal itself. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to seek asbab, to seek the means to heal ourselves. Whether that's taking medicine, whether that's talking to a therapist, whatever that might be, you use the means and you make dua, right? Now religion and prayer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been proven scientifically to have a very positive effect on people who have mental health illnesses. It can help you overcome the troubles that you might have. It can be part of the solution. But it doesn't mean that if you have depression, it means that you don't have iman, right? That's a really false equation that we give each other. Rather, the person who has this is just could be a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah tests the people that He loves. So in fact, if you have an illness, it might be an indication that Allah loves you, right? And that you seek help from a therapist, or you seek help from a doctor, or you get the medication that you need. This has nothing to do with your iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In fact, it is part of your iman to seek the means that Allah has given you in order to achieve your health and your wellness.
We have a question.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. It's not a question, it's just like I want to share a story. I want to, just a story relating to relate
So just
to
speak
what,
into the microphone, Hasna.
Yeah, it's just a story, my journey of healing. And it's related to what Imam, Hindy and Amira was discussing tonight. Alhamdulillah, like I'm Imam, I'm a professional, and I work for the government. And I was a former teacher, like back home. I come from Mauritius, and it's been 12 years I'm here. Moving from a country is a big change, right? It has an impact on your mental health. It's a big adaptive, like most of us here, right? Some of us and some are born here. And I didn't realize that we have to take care about, I didn't know about self-care because in my culture, from Indian background, we were not taught at school to have me time. And for me, I was always on the go, like, alhamdulillah, I've been active in the community, want to be a super mama, want to be like a professional and want to be there as a wife, as a daughter, as a sister in the community. And at one point, I burned out. And I didn't know my rights as an employee because I was new in the work culture here. It was a new work system. And I didn't know about my rights. And subhanAllah, I was bullied. And at one point, after 8 years in the government, I burned out. I couldn't take it. And it happened in winter. And coming from a tropical island, I then realized about how the sunlight has an effect on my mood. And therefore, Allah has tested me with my work, with my health, and I can say, like Imam just mentioned, that Allah tests people who He loves. And for me, it was a shock when I was diagnosed depression in 2016. It was a shock for me, for my spouse, for my parents. And it took time for me to accept that Husna has depression because it's a shock, because we don't accept that we have mental illness. And I can say that, subhanAllah, having the right support make a big difference in our healing. MashaAllah, I had an amazing husband, amazing parents who were there for me, amazing sisters in the community. Amira was there for me too. Thank you, Amira. And I can say that at one point, you have to, it depends on, even you have all the support, it depends on you and your Rabb. And you have to know that it's you have to make the change. It's you have to take the actions. And it's you have to be open to medications, open to the side effects of it, open to therapy, open to the healing of the body, mind, and soul, because it is this we have to take care of. And for me, my first session with my therapist, she asked me, what does Husna likes? And when you go through depression, you don't know what you like. For me, it was just a blank. And then I said, yes, I like flowers. And she asked me to buy flowers for myself. But I never did that for me before. And this is how my healing started, by taking care of Husna. And I'm talking from my heart to my heart of our sisters here. I can tell you, we all are mothers, daughters. We have to take care of ourselves, to be there for our spouse, to be there for our kids, to be there for our teenagers, and to be open for counseling. Alhamdulillah, I have 3 kids, a teenager of 14, another twin of 9, and a son of 6. I can say that parenting is challenging. Alhamdulillah, but mashallah, we are blessed to be in a country where we have support system. We just have to say that I need help. Don't be shy to say that you need help, because asking for help is not a weakness, it's a strength.
Thank you, Husna.
And alhamdulillah, I can just we have to be, the self-care is how to be exercise, eating healthy, and having like a social network too, right? Because as mothers, we've always been the last. And I can say to my sister, just exercise, be a priority, put yourself first, and have a relationship with your Rabb. Because at the end of the day, there's only you and your Rabb. And you take responsibility. And don't play the victim. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
And focus on dua.
Thank you.
Subhanallah, dua is amazing. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Husna. Thank you so much. That takes a lot of courage, Husna. So I just want to acknowledge that, and I really want to thank you for putting yourself out there and sharing that. I think that you actually touched on something that's really important, and that I don't think we talk enough about, and I'm going to ask you to reflect on it, but I do wonder what's happening with women in our community as well. I mean, I think we can look at both men, we can look at women, we can look at children, but let's focus on women. And wonder, I mean, there's so much expectation on women in terms of the expectation that some if they are married, or living with their fathers or whatnot, an expectation that the woman's role is to make sure that the home is always in the best shape it can be, that there's always food available that's just fresh out of the oven, while at the same time, due to economic needs and also professional needs and interests, that women are also now working, sometimes full-time, part-time, and they are trying to balance. And Husna talked about real burnout, because she was trying to be everything to everyone. So, and I'm sure that is putting stress on the family, because on the other side, if there is a husband and there's a marriage there, many men have grown either in countries or were raised by people who, there was a different time, and there may have been more opportunity for women to focus solely on the home and solely on raising the children. And for women who can do that and want to do that, that's a wonderful opportunity for them. But there are other women who can't do that, and they do need to work. So how do you see that playing out on stress in the Muslim home? And what are solutions, and what's the role of husbands or children in making sure that moms are not burning out?
It's a great question. I wish we had a female
Yeah, I realize I'm asking it to the male imam, but yeah.
There's a lot to take that's so true. I mean, people used to talk about, is it halal for a woman to work? Is it not halal for a woman to work? That conversation went away. You know why it went away? Because of need. And now majority of the households in all of our countries are dual income, right? Because people can't survive on one income, and so both are working. So it kind of destroyed the theoretical question with the practical reality. And in that situation, the expectation that the woman is going to do everything at home and then she's also working full time is just a completely unrealistic expectation. But we've raised a generation of children to think that that's the way that it's supposed to be. And I think all of us to some extent have contributed to this. How many times in a family does the mother expect her daughter to study for school and to do the dishes and to help her get everything ready for dinner? And her son, she's like, just study please. And he's like, no, I gotta go play sports, right? Like there's no expectation on their son, and all the expectation is on their daughter. Which, by the way, has caused a lot of problems, including that our daughters are very successful and our sons are not, which is one issue, but we'll park that one for now. The other issue is that it's putting way too much stress on women, where now they get married and their husband thinks, well, you're supposed to do all that stuff. That's beneath me as a man to be in the kitchen working. That's beneath me as a man to be cleaning up the house. And I'm just going to do whatever I want. I go to work and I come back and I do whatever I want and you got to do everything else. And that's just not fair. And it's not the way that our Prophet ﷺ lived his life. When they asked Aisha, what was the Prophet like at home? She said, كَانَ فِي مِحْنَةِ أَهْلِ. He was in the employ of his family. If they wanted someone to clean, he was cleaning. If it was time to go run an errand, he was running the errands. He was doing whatever his family needed, to cook, to clean, whatever they needed. He ﷺ was there doing it. So this culture of the man is not required to do anything inside the house. He has no responsibility when it comes to dinner. He has no responsibility with raising the children. He just comes and goes as he pleases. That's a cultural phenomenon that we've created that did not come from our religious beliefs. We've created it and instituted it in the homes, and now it creates all this stress and this problem that women are having where they're expected to do everything for everyone. It's just not humanly possible for them.
So can you speak a little bit more about the role of the father in the home?
Yeah, so another great quotation that comes to my mind is Imam Ahmad, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayhi, when his wife had passed away, they saw him making dua for his wife. And they said to him, why are you crying? He was crying and making dua. They said, why are you crying? He said, I was making dua for my wife who passed away. And he said, I was married to her for 20 years. وَمَا اخْتَلَفْنَا فِي شَيْءٍ. We never differed over any matter. They said, how is that possible? He said, if I got upset, she would relent. And if she got upset, I would relent. Basically, that their relationship was like a rope being pulled, right? If one of them was upset about a matter, the other person tried to please the other person. And in that, with that parable in mind, that's really the way that our households need to operate. Where if one person is feeling stress over a matter, the other person says, okay, it's my turn now to take on some of this. It's my turn to help out, to relieve the other person. If one person's upset for one reason, okay, it's my turn to say I'm sorry, and I'll do whatever it needs to be to make the other person happy. And that you're constantly in this cycle of trying to help and please one another. And the reality is that, men and women, sometimes we want different things. Men, respond to having a feeling of respect and respect and honor in the relationship, and women seek to have mercy and affection in the relationship. But it's kind of like a cycle, right? If I see that my wife is having difficulty, my affection and love for her is helping her, showing her that I care. And when I show her that I care, then she's going to respond by showing me a lot of respect and honor. And when I feel that respect and honor for her, I'm going to show her that I care even more. I'm going to buy her gifts. I'm going to help her with her work. I'm going to do whatever I can to help her. And then she's going to show me even more respect. And it becomes this upward cycle. And you have to understand your marriage is either going through an upward cycle or it's going through a downward spiral.
So just as we are about to wrap up, we could, I know, go on for quite a while. I want to just ask you to sort of summarize how critical is that relationship between the parents on creating an atmosphere in the home that is peaceful and comfortable for children. And in that relationship and seeking that relationship, is it all right to seek family counseling, marriage counseling, if you are struggling? And is it okay to seek it from those who are not Muslim? And if you could just sort of reflect on these as we conclude.
Absolutely. So when you're raising your children in your home, you and your husband, or the husband and the wife, both of you, you are the moral leaders that your children are looking up to. And you have to be a team when you're dealing with your children. A team in how you approach them, a team in how you talk to them. A team in what you decide you want to expose your children to and what you don't want to expose your children to. And if you're undermining each other and you're not on the same page, your children will see that and they will exploit it to their own harm and to their own detriment. And so you have to understand that going in, that you guys are a team together, and that the strength of your relationship will carry the future for your children. And on that understanding, you have to recognize that you need to take time to build your relationship between one another. You need to take time to ensure that the relationship between the two of you is strong in order to help your children come along. And people use the example of, you know, when you're in an airplane and the airbags come down, you always have to help yourself first before you help your children, because if you're dying, you can't help your children. If your relationship is in shambles, it's going to be really difficult for you to help your children. So you need to try to build that relationship between each other. And I would say not only is it important for you to get marriage counseling if your marriage is having difficulty, you should be getting marriage counseling before you get married. And you should be getting marriage counseling or seeking, you know, some counseling or trying to do some work together, even if there's no problem in your marriage, just to increase that love and to increase the connection between one another. That's important. I know people don't like to have that conversation, but it's important because it strengthens what you have in place between the two of you. And if there are any problems that might manifest down the road, it's better to take care of them when they're small issues rather than when they're bigger issues. And in terms of seeking counseling from non-Muslims, you know, obviously I do think that it's the best to seek it from qualified Muslims who are qualified counselors, if available. Unfortunately, sometimes it's not always available. And in that case, I would say seek a tandem approach, where you're seeking counseling from a marriage counselor if they're not a Muslim. Also go to your Imam and talk to your Imam about what you've talked about with your marriage counselor, for the reason that if there's anything they've mentioned that might be contradictory to our faith, the Imam can supplement that situation by offering some Islamic advice as well. And so that way you've created a strategy to take care of yourself. But it's absolutely critical and necessary for you to take care of your marriage in order for you to be able to take care of your children, because a situation where both parents are not on the same page is very detrimental to our children.
Thank you so much, Imam Ibrahim Hindy, for an excellent discussion. I hope it was useful to everyone who had the opportunity to hear you, inshallah. And I definitely encourage people to reach out to their imams here in Ottawa. I know that Imam Ziad Dalit of SNMC has talked a lot about training other imams in Ottawa around family counseling. So it's certainly an issue, and I certainly encourage people not to be afraid or ashamed of seeking help when they need it, inshallah. So thanks to everyone for taking the time. Hope it was useful, inshallah, and I hope the rest of your I.LEAD experience is as important as this was. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.